A lot of people have asked me what the breaking point was with my wife, who, I was married for 25 years, and my wife passed away from alcohol use disorder a little over 4.5 years ago. And there was one incident that happened back in 2015 when my mother was actually dying, and she had had a series of strokes, and it was a very long, drawn-out thing. We ended up flying from California to New York, where my dad lived. And while we were at the hospital, I was at the hospital with my brother, my sister, my father, and some other people. My wife stayed back at my dad's house for whatever reason. And I came home early one day from all this trauma with my mother, and I found my wife passed out in the middle of the living room. She had somehow raided my dad's liquor cabinet. He had a few old bottles up above the oven, and they're like old Jack Daniels, vermouth, mixers. It was just some old dusty bottles, and apparently she had polished them off. Yeah, I found her in the middle of the living room, really in a puddle of her own bodily fluids. And it was just, for me, it was just such a brash, inconsiderate thing to have to go through after having spent, the last week or two watching my mother slowly, succumb to, her issues, and then to have to come home to this. And unfortunately, this was just the beginning of a horror story that lasted about a month. And again, I really tell this story because I know a lot of families are going through this particular kind of madness. And it's important to have something that resonates with you and to really realize that sometimes enough is enough. And you do have to make a boundary that can no longer be crossed. And for me, certainly emotionally and mentally, this was it for me. But so after that incident happened, I realized that, I had to get my wife out of my dad's house for a while. So my son and I and my wife, we took a side trip down to Gettysburg, which was, several, probably 6-7 hours away. And then from there, we went all the way to Washington, D.C., because I wanted to show my son, some of the East Coast. Unfortunately, we had another incident that was just as volatile, if not worse, when we checked into the hotel in Washington, D.C. So after checking in the hotel, I really had a heart-to-heart with my wife and told her how disappointing this all was and, how stressful this was. I'm trying to mourn my mother, and you're drunk constantly and stealing alcohol and getting it any way you can. In fact, we had to leave the house because of these actions. And my son was, he was upset with his mother as well for the same reasons. It was just so outrageous. So, we sat around and talked for a good hour and a half, and she promised that she would try and stop drinking. So we decided to go across. There was a restaurant in the hotel. We ended up having dinner there, and my wife, the first thing she did is ordered one glass of wine after another, and really didn't eat any dinner like she often did. And my son and I just sat there with our mouths open because we just couldn't believe after just having this long, drawn-out conversation, it didn't even last 10 minutes. Her promises were completely just really meaningless. So my son and I decided, I paid the bill, and we just went upstairs back to the hotel room, and I left my wife at the table. A lot of people might have a problem with that, but she was inebriated, and I just couldn't be around it anymore, unfortunately. And then about a half hour later, my son and I were in the hotel room just kind of hanging out. My wife finally came back. She was kind of bouncing off the walls. My son and I were just kind of quiet because we were just, I think we were both kind of raging inside. We just really had nothing else to say. We were so filled with disappointment and really a lot of animosity. And she went into the bathroom, and unfortunately, when she went to the bathroom, she fell down on top of the toilet, smashing the whole back of the toilet, shattering the top of the toilet, and then water kept just gushing everywhere out of the toilet. I didn't really know what to do. I heard a big smash. I had to go in there, and she was flat on the floor with water going all over the place. It was just an unbelievable mess. So I had to call down to the front desk and tell them that there's a water leakage. They had guys come up. By the time they came up and turned the water off, the whole floor, most of the room we were in was flooded out, and it was going out into the floor. So to bring this whole story together, the hotel gave us another room. So my son and I went to another room down the hall, and Amanda was so inebriated that we couldn't even carry her down to the next room. So we ended up leaving her, in the locked room of the hotel room after the workers had turned the water off. The next morning, she called me up, and she thought she had abandoned us. She had no memory of breaking the toilet, didn't understand what had happened, was very, very confused. And this is the kind of incident that was just the breaking point for any relationship. I mean, from there we drove back to New York, and subsequently the next week my mother passed away, and I had to spend really all my energy and effort just trying to deal with my wife, and I really had little time to mourn my mother, even through the funeral, because I was always concerned about what my wife was going to do, what outrageous thing was she going to do next. And again, this video is not designed as a rant. It happened many years ago. It's designed for other families and people who are dependent on alcohol to realize how they affect their families, and for families to recognize that they're not alone when you're going through someone who has this mental illness, and it is definitely a mental illness. And again, once you're ready to work with me, click on the link above, schedule a breakthrough call in the Calendly link. And I also go live Monday through Friday, 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And then again, we have the Facebook group called There's an Alcoholic in the Family. And again, thanks for listening.